What if I told you that the greatest story ever written contains a murder mystery, a catastrophic flood, family betrayal, dreams that predict the future, and a plot twist that saves an entire nation from starvation? The book of Genesis isn't just ancient history. It's the foundation of everything. From the moment light pierced through darkness to the final breath of a man who went from slave to second in command of Egypt, Genesis reveals how God chose one family to change the world forever. You'll witness humanity's first choice, the consequences that echoed through generations, and promises made under starlit skies that still impact us today. This isn't the Genesis you heard in Sunday school. This is the raw, unfiltered narrative of creation, destruction, faith, deception, and redemption. Buckle up, because in the next chapters, you're about to experience the book of Genesis like you've never seen before. In the beginning, there was absolutely nothing. The earth had no shape, no form, just emptiness everywhere. Darkness covered the deep waters, and everything existed in complete silence. But then something incredible happened that would change everything forever. God spoke. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, his very first words shattered the silence. "Let there be light." The moment those words left his mouth, light exploded into existence. It was immediate, powerful, and perfect. God looked at the light and saw that it was good. He separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and calling the darkness night. The evening came, then the morning. This was the very first day. On the second day, God continued his creative work. He spoke again and created an enormous space right in the middle of the waters. This massive expanse separated the waters above from the waters below. God called this space heaven or the sky. It was the second day. The third day brought even more transformation. God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." The waters rushed together, and suddenly dry ground emerged. God called the dry ground earth, and he called the gathered waters seas. But God wasn't done with the third day yet. He commanded, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth." Instantly, plants pushed up through the soil, trees grew tall, each producing seeds and fruit exactly as God designed. On the fourth day, God placed lights in the sky. He made the sun to rule the day and the moon to rule the night. He scattered countless stars across the heavens like diamonds. These lights would mark time, seasons, days, and years. The fifth day brought life in a new way. God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth." The seas filled with fish and great sea creatures. Birds took flight for the first time, soaring through the sky. God blessed them in Genesis 1:22, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." Then came the sixth day. God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth." Animals appeared everywhere. But God saved the very best for last. In Genesis 1:26, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth." Genesis 1:27 tells us, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and told them to fill the earth and rule over it." God looked at absolutely everything he had made, and it was very good. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work and made that day holy. Genesis chapter 2 gives us more detail about the man's creation. Verse 7 explains, "Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature." God didn't just speak this time, he personally shaped the man from dirt and breathed his own breath into him. After creating the man, God planted a garden in Eden, somewhere in the east. He made all kinds of trees grow there, trees that were beautiful and produced delicious fruit. In the very middle of the garden stood two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed out of Eden to water the entire garden, then divided into 4 separate rivers, spreading in different directions. God placed the man in this perfect garden. Genesis 2:15 tells us, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." The man had a purpose from day one, to cultivate the garden and care for it. God gave him freedom to eat from any tree in the garden, but then came one clear rule. In Genesis 2:16-17, God commanded, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." God then brought every animal and bird to the man to see what he would name them. Whatever the man called each creature became its name. The man named all the livestock, the birds, and every wild animal. But as he did this, something became obvious. Genesis 2:20 says, "But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him." Among all these creatures, there wasn't a single one that was a suitable companion. God noticed it wasn't good for the man to be alone. Genesis 2:18 records him saying, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." This was the first time something was called not good in creation. So God did something remarkable. Genesis 2:21-22 tells us exactly what happened. "So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man." When the man woke up and saw her standing there, his reaction was immediate. Genesis 2:23 captures his words, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." After naming all those animals and finding no companion, here finally was someone like him, yet wonderfully different. Right after this beautiful moment, Genesis 2:24 establishes God's design for marriage. "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." This was the blueprint for all marriages to come. And Genesis 2:25 adds, "And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." They lived in perfect innocence, with nothing to hide from each other or from God. Everything changed when the serpent appeared. Genesis 3:1 describes him as more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. The serpent approached the woman with a question designed to plant doubt. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? The woman explained that they could eat from any tree except the one in the middle of the garden. She added that God said not to touch it or they would die. But the serpent directly contradicted God's warning. Genesis 3:4-5 records his lie. "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The woman looked at the tree more carefully. Genesis 3-6 describes what she saw. "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate." The moment they swallowed that fruit, everything changed. Genesis 3:7 tells us, "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." Suddenly, they felt shame for the first time. When they heard God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, fear gripped their hearts. Genesis 3:8 says, "And they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden." God called out, "Where are you?" The man answered in Genesis 3:10, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. God asked a direct question. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? The blame game started immediately. The man pointed at the woman in Genesis 3:12, saying, The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate. The woman pointed at the serpent. The serpent deceived me, and I ate. God turned to the serpent first. Genesis 3:14-15 records the curse. Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock, and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman God said in Genesis 3:16, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Then God spoke to the man. Genesis 3:17-19 lays out his judgment, and to Adam he said, Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The man named his wife Eve, because she would be the mother of all living. God made garments of animal skins for them, the first death recorded in Scripture. Then Genesis 3:22-24 explains why they had to leave. Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Outside the garden, life continued. Genesis 4:1 tells us, Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. As they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain worked as a farmer. One day, both brothers brought offerings to God. Cain brought some produce from his crops, but Abel brought the best parts from the firstborn of his flock. Genesis 4:4-5 reveals what happened. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. God came to Cain and asked why he was angry. In Genesis 4:7, God warned him, If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. But Cain ignored the warning. Genesis 4:8 records what happened next. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This was the first murder in human history. God came to Cain and asked, Where is Abel your brother? Cain's response dripped with defiance. Genesis 4:9 says, He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? But God knew the truth. He said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. God cursed Cain, telling him the ground would no longer produce crops for him, and he would wander the earth. Cain cried that his punishment was too great and feared someone would kill him. So God placed a mark on Cain to protect him, and Genesis 4:16 tells us, Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Back with Adam and Eve, something important happened. Genesis 4:25 records, And Adam knew his wife again. And she bore a son, and called his name Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel. For Cain killed him. Seth had a son named Enosh, and Genesis 4:26 says, At that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Genesis chapter 5 gives us the family line from Adam through Seth. These men lived incredibly long lives. Adam lived 930 years, Seth 912 years, Enosh 905 years. One man stands out in this list. Genesis 5:24 simply says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He never died. God took him directly to heaven. Enoch's son Methuselah lived longer than anyone, 969 years. As humans multiplied on earth, darkness spread. Genesis 6:1-2 describes something disturbing. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. But the real problem was humanity's heart. Genesis 6:5 paints a dark picture. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. People weren't just occasionally sinning. Every thought was completely evil all the time. This broke God's heart. Genesis 6:6-7 reveals his grief, and the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land. But Genesis 6:8 gives us hope. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:9 describes Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. In a world full of evil, Noah stood out. God told Noah his plan to destroy all life with a flood, but Noah would be saved. Genesis 6:14-16 contains the building instructions. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. This was a massive boat, about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. God made a covenant with Noah. Genesis 6:18-20 explains, But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark. You, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. Genesis 6:22 says, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. When Noah was 600 years old, God told him to enter the ark. 7 days later, Genesis 7:11 describes what happened. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Rain poured down for 40 days and nights. The water kept rising. Genesis 7:19-20 shows the flood's extent, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. Everything on land died. Genesis 7:23 says, Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. The water covered the earth for 150 days. Then Genesis 8:1 tells us, But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a raven, then a dove, which returned because it found nowhere to land. 7 days later, he sent the dove again. Genesis 8:11 says, And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided. After another 7 days, the dove didn't return. God told Noah to leave the ark with his family and all the animals. Noah built an altar and offered sacrifices. God smelled the pleasing aroma and made a promise. Genesis 8:21-22 records his words, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. God blessed Noah and his sons, telling them to multiply and fill the earth. Then he made a covenant. Genesis 9:11 contains his promise, I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. And never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. As a sign, God placed a rainbow in the clouds. Genesis 9:16 explains, "When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." Noah lived 350 years after the flood, reaching 950 years old. His 3 sons became the fathers of everyone who would spread across the earth. At one point, all people spoke the same language. They settled in Shinar and decided to build a city with a tower reaching heaven. Genesis 11:4 records their words, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." God came down to see what they were building. Genesis 11:6-7 records his response. "And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." God confused their languages on the spot. Genesis 11:8-9 tells us, "So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth." After the Tower of Babel scattered people across the earth, Genesis chapter 11 introduces us to a man named Abram living in Ur of the Chaldeans. He was married to Sarai, but she couldn't have children. Abram's father Terah took the family and started traveling toward Canaan, but they stopped and settled in a place called Haran instead. Then one day, everything changed. God spoke directly to Abram. Genesis 12:1-3 records this life-changing moment. "Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." God was asking Abram to leave everything familiar, his country, his relatives, his father's household, and go to a land God would show him. God didn't give him a map or specific directions. He just said, "Go and trust me," but God made incredible promises. He would make Abram into a great nation, bless him, make his name great, and through him every family on earth would be blessed. Abram's response was immediate. Genesis 12:4-5 tells us, "So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him." Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, and Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came. At 75 years old, Abram packed up everything and left. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all their possessions, and the people who had joined them, and they traveled to Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land to a place called Shechem. Genesis 12:6 adds an important detail. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The land God was promising wasn't empty. Other people already lived there. But then God appeared to Abram again. Genesis 12:7 says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. This was the first time God specified which land he was talking about. This land, Canaan, would belong to Abram's descendants. Abram built an altar right there to worship God. Then he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel, pitched his tent, and built another altar to call on the name of the Lord. Just when things seemed to be going well, a crisis hit. Genesis 12:10 says, "Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land." A severe famine struck Canaan, and Abram decided to go to Egypt where there was food. As they approached Egypt, fear took over. Abram looked at his wife and worried about what would happen. Genesis 12:11-13 records his plan. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, "I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake." Abram was afraid the Egyptians would kill him to take his beautiful wife. So he asked Sarai to lie and say she was his sister. This was partly true. She was his half-sister, but it was still deception. Abram was willing to put his wife at risk to save his own life. Everything Abram feared came true. Genesis 12:14-15 tells us, "When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's household. Because of her, Pharaoh treated Abram well." Genesis 12:16 says, "And for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels." Abram got rich off this deception, but God intervened to protect Sarai and his promises. Genesis 12:17 says, "But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. God struck Pharaoh's household with serious diseases because of Sarai. Somehow, Pharaoh figured out the connection between these plagues and Sarai. Pharaoh called Abram in and confronted him. Genesis 12:18-19 records his words. "So Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Pharaoh was angry and had every right to be. This pagan king showed more integrity than God's chosen man. Genesis 12:20 concludes, "And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had." Pharaoh provided an escort to make sure they left Egypt. Abram left Egypt and traveled back through the Negeb toward Bethel. Genesis 13:2 tells us about his wealth. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. The deception in Egypt had made him wealthy, but it also created problems. Lot, Abram's nephew who had traveled with him from the beginning, was also very wealthy. Genesis 13:5-6 describes the situation. "And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. They both had so many animals and servants that the land couldn't support them living close together anymore." Conflict erupted. Genesis 13:7 says, "And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock." The workers who looked after Abram's animals started arguing with the workers who looked after Lot's animals. They probably fought over water sources and grazing areas. Abram took the initiative to solve the problem. Genesis 13:8-9 records what he said. "Then Abram said to Lot, 'Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left.'" Even though Abram was the older relative and had the right to choose first, he generously offered Lot first pick of the land. Lot looked around carefully. Genesis 13:10-11 describes his decision. "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. The Jordan Valley looked like paradise, well watered, lush and green. Lot chose the best land for himself and moved east." Genesis 13:12-13 adds a disturbing detail. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Lot chose based purely on what looked good, but he was moving towards Sodom, a city full of evil people. After Lot left, God spoke to Abram again. Genesis 13, 14, 17 records this powerful moment. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." God expanded his promise. All the land Abram could see in every direction would belong to him and his descendants forever. His offspring would be as numerous as dust particles, impossible to count. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing where Lot had settled. Genesis chapter 14 opens with a war involving 9 kings. 4 powerful kings from the east had been ruling over 5 kings in the Jordan Valley for 12 years. In the 13th year, these 5 kings rebelled. So in the 14th year, the 4 eastern kings came with their armies to crush the rebellion. They defeated various groups and then came to the valley of Siddim to face the 5 rebel kings. Genesis 14:10 describes the battle. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. It was a complete defeat. The victorious kings took everything. Genesis 14:11-12 tells us, "So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their provisions, and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. Lot and everything he owned were captured. Someone escaped and brought news to Abram." Genesis 14:14 describes Abram's response. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. The moment Abram heard his nephew was captured, he gathered 318 trained men and went after the enemy armies. Genesis 14:15-16 describes the rescue. "And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people." Abram launched a nighttime attack, defeated these 4 powerful kings, and chased them north. He recovered everything, all the possessions, Lot, the women, and all the other captives. On his way back, something extraordinary happened. Genesis 14:18 introduces a mysterious figure, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Melchizedek appeared, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He brought bread and wine for Abram. Then Genesis 14:19-20 records his blessing. "And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything." Melchizedek blessed Abram in the name of God Most High, recognizing that God had given Abram the victory. In response, Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of everything he had recovered. Then the king of Sodom tried to make a deal. Genesis 14:21 records his offer, "And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself." But Abram refused. Genesis 14:22-23 shows his integrity. "But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich." Abram had made an oath to God that he wouldn't take anything from the king of Sodom. He didn't want anyone saying that a wicked king made him rich. After these events, God spoke to Abram in a vision. Genesis 15:1 records the beginning. "After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." God told Abram not to be afraid and promised to be his shield, but Abram had a question. Genesis 15:2-3 captures his honest response. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. Abram pointed out the obvious problem. God kept promising descendants, but he still had no children. God's response was immediate. Genesis 15:4-5 records what happened. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. God told Abram that his own biological son would be his heir. Then God took him outside and told him to count the stars. Abram's descendants would be just as numerous. Abram's response is one of the most important verses in the Bible. Genesis 15:6 says, And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Abram believed God's promise, even though it seemed impossible, and God counted that faith as righteousness. But Abram asked another honest question. Genesis 15:8 records it. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? How could he be sure he would possess the land? God responded by making a formal covenant. Genesis 15:9-10 describes the preparation. He said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in half. Abram brought the animals, cut them in half except for the birds, and arranged the pieces opposite each other. Then, as the sun was setting, something profound happened. Genesis 15:12 says, As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. God caused a deep sleep to fall on Abram. While Abram slept, God revealed the future. Genesis 15:13-14 contains this prophecy. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. God told Abram his descendants would be enslaved for 400 years, but God would judge that nation, and they would leave with great wealth. Then came the covenant ceremony. Genesis 15:17-18 describes this awesome moment. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. A smoking firepot and flaming torch, representing God's presence, passed between the animal pieces. Notice that only God passed through, not Abram. This was a one-sided covenant. God was binding himself to keep these promises. Time passed, but still no child came. Sarai remained barren. After 10 years in Canaan, Sarai decided to take matters into her own hands. Genesis 16:1-2 tells us what she proposed. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar, and Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Sarai gave her Egyptian servant Hagar to Abram as a wife. This was a common practice in that culture. Abram agreed to the plan. Genesis 16:4 continues, And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Once Hagar knew she was pregnant, she looked down on Sarai. Sarai blamed Abram. Genesis 16:5 records her complaint. And Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your arms, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. Abram didn't want to get involved. Genesis 16:6 records his response. But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Abram told Sarai to do whatever she wanted with Hagar. Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that Hagar ran away into the wilderness, but God saw Hagar's suffering. Genesis 16:7-9 describes a remarkable encounter. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur, and he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring in the desert and told her to go back and submit to Sarai. Then the angel made a promise. Genesis 16:10-12 records his words. The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." God promised to multiply Hagar's descendants. She would have a son named Ishmael, meaning God hears. Hagar responded with worship. Genesis 16:13 says, "So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, 'You are a God of seeing.' For she said, 'Truly here I have seen him who looks after me.'" She called God the God who sees. Hagar returned and gave birth. Genesis 16:15-16 concludes, "And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael." Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. Abram was 86 when Ishmael was born. 13 years passed with no word from God. Then when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him again. Genesis 17:1-2 records this encounter. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly." Abram fell on his face. God continued speaking. Genesis 17:4-5 contains a name change. "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations." God changed Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many nations. Then God gave the sign of this covenant. Genesis 17:10-11 explains, "This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." Every male would be circumcised as a permanent physical sign. Then God spoke about Sarai. Genesis 17:15-16 records this stunning promise. "And God said to Abraham, 'As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her." God changed Sarai's name to Sarah and promised that she would bear Abraham a son. Abraham's reaction was understandable. Genesis 17:17 says, "Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, 'Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?' Abraham laughed at the impossibility of it. Abraham suggested an alternative. Genesis 17:18 records his plea. "And Abraham said to God, 'Oh, that Ishmael might live before you.'" Couldn't Ishmael be the promised son? But God was clear. Genesis 17:19 contains his response. God said, "No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. God said no, Sarah would have the son, and his name would be Isaac. God would bless Ishmael too, but the covenant would continue through Isaac. And God gave a specific timeline, this time next year. Abraham obeyed immediately. Genesis 17:23 describes his response. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all those born in his house or bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskins that very day, as God had said to him. That very same day Abraham circumcised himself, Ishmael, and every male in his household. Shortly after this, the Lord appeared to Abraham again. Genesis 18:1-2 sets the scene. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. 3 men suddenly appeared. Abraham immediately showed them generous hospitality. He offered water, foot washing, rest, and food. Abraham rushed to prepare a feast with Sarah's help. Genesis 18:8 says, Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. Then one of the visitors asked about Sarah. Genesis 18:10 records the conversation. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son. One of these visitors was the Lord himself, confirming that in 1 year Sarah would have a son. Sarah was listening from inside the tent. Genesis 18:12 describes her reaction. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? Sarah laughed to herself at the thought, but the Lord heard her. Genesis 18:13-14 records his response. The Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh and say, Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Then the men prepared to leave, looking toward Sodom. God decided to reveal his plans. Genesis 18:20-21 reveals the problem. Then the Lord said, Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. Abraham stayed standing before the Lord. Then he interceded for Sodom. Genesis 18:23-25 records his appeal. Then Abraham drew near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? God agreed. Genesis 18:26 says, And the Lord said, If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham continued negotiating. 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. Each time, God agreed to spare the city if that number of righteous people could be found. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom that evening. Genesis 19:1 tells us, The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Lot invited them to stay at his house. Genesis 19:3 says, But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Then something horrifying happened. Genesis 19:4-5 describes the evil of Sodom. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them. Every man in the city surrounded Lot's house and demanded his guests. Lot went outside. Genesis 19:9 records their response. But they said, Stand back. And they said, This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. The angels pulled Lot inside and struck the mob with blindness. Genesis 19:12-13 records their warning. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place." Lot tried to warn his sons-in-law. Genesis 19:14 tells us, "But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting." They thought he was joking. As dawn approached, the angels urged Lot to hurry. Genesis 19:15-16 describes the scene. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. Lot hesitated, so the angels grabbed them by the hands and dragged them out. Genesis 19:17 records the command, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." But Lot asked to flee to a small nearby city instead. The angel agreed. Then judgment fell. Genesis 19:24-25 describes the destruction. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife made a fatal mistake. Genesis 19:26 records it. But Lot's wife, behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham looked towards Sodom. Genesis 19:28 describes what he saw. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Genesis 19:29 summarizes, "So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow." Abraham was now very old, and God had blessed him in every way. But there was something important he needed to take care of, finding a wife for his son Isaac. Genesis 24:1-4 describes what Abraham did. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred, and take a wife for my son Isaac." Abraham called his most trusted servant and made him take a solemn oath. The servant had to promise he wouldn't find a wife for Isaac from the Canaanite women. Instead, he needed to travel back to Abraham's homeland and find a wife from his own relatives. The servant took 10 camels loaded with expensive gifts and traveled to Mesopotamia. When he arrived at the city well in the evening, he prayed for success. Genesis 24:12-14 records his prayer. And he said, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today, and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, 'Please let down your jar that I may drink,' and who shall say, 'Drink, and I will water your camels,' let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac." Before he finished praying, God answered. Genesis 24:15-20 describes what happened. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water to drink from your jar." She said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, She said, "I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. Rebekah fulfilled the sign perfectly. The servant gave her expensive jewelry and asked whose daughter she was. She identified herself as Bethuel's daughter, Abraham's great-niece, and said there was room at her father's house. The servant immediately worshipped God for leading him to the right family. Rebekah ran home and told her family. Her brother Laban rushed out and invited the servant in. The servant refused to eat until he explained his mission. He told the whole story and concluded with his request. Genesis 24:49 records his words, "Now then, if you are going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me that I may turn to the right hand or to the left." Laban and Bethuel recognized God's hand in this. Genesis 24:50-51 contains their response. Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken." They agreed to give Rebekah to Isaac. In the morning, the servant wanted to leave immediately, but the family asked for 10 more days. They decided to ask Rebekah. Genesis 24:58 tells us, "And they called Rebekah and said to her, 'Will you go with this man?' She said, 'I will go.'" Rebekah chose to go immediately. When they arrived, Isaac was in the field. Genesis 24:63-67 describes their meeting. "And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Abraham took another wife named Keturah, who bore him 6 sons. But Abraham made sure his inheritance went to the right son. Genesis 25:5-6 explains, "Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac, eastward to the east country. Then Abraham's life came to an end." Genesis 25:7-8 records his death. "These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people." Abraham lived 175 years and died peacefully. Genesis 25:9 tells us, "Isaac and Ishmael his sons buried him in the cave of Machpelah." After Abraham's death, Isaac faced the same problem his parents had faced: no children. Genesis 25:21 says, "And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived." Isaac prayed for his wife, and God answered. But this wasn't a normal pregnancy. Genesis 25:22-23 describes what happened. "The children struggled together within her, and she said, 'If it is like this, why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger.' The babies were fighting inside her, and God revealed they would become 2 nations, with the older serving the younger. When Rebekah gave birth, the prophecy began. Genesis 25:24-26 describes the birth. "When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. The first twin came out red and hairy. They named him Esau. The second came out holding Esau's heel. They named him Jacob. As they grew, they became completely different. Genesis 25:27-28 says, "When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Their parents played favorites. Isaac loved Esau, while Rebekah loved Jacob. One day something happened that revealed their characters. Genesis 25:29-34 tells the story. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, 'Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted.' Jacob said, 'Sell me your birthright now.' Esau said, 'I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?' Jacob said, 'Swear to me now.' And so he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, showing he despised what was sacred. A famine struck the land, and Isaac went to Gerar. God appeared and told him not to go to Egypt. Genesis 26:2-3 records God's instructions. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands." God renewed the covenant with Isaac, but Isaac made the same mistake Abraham had made. Genesis 26:7 says, "When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, 'She is my sister,' for he feared to say, 'my wife,' thinking, lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance." Isaac lied about Rebekah being his sister. King Abimelech discovered the truth. Genesis 26:9-10 records his rebuke. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she is your wife. How then could you say, 'She is my sister'?" Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." Despite Isaac's deception, God blessed him abundantly. Genesis 26:12-13 says, "And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. Isaac became extremely rich, and the Philistines envied him. The Philistines stopped up the wells Abraham had dug." Genesis 26:15 says, "Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. Abimelech asked Isaac to leave because he had become too powerful. Isaac moved and began reopening his father's wells. His servants also dug new wells, but this created conflict." Genesis 26:19-22 describes the disputes. "But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, 'The water is ours.' So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, 'For now the Lord has made room for us.' Isaac went to Beersheba, where God appeared to him. Genesis 26:24 records God's words, "And the Lord appeared to him the same night, and said, 'I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you, and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake.'" Isaac built an altar and worshipped. Then Abimelech came seeking peace. Genesis 26:28-29 contains his request. They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, 'Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you.'" They made a covenant of peace. Esau made decisions that grieved his parents. Genesis 26:34-35 tells us, when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Esau married 2 Hittite women who made life miserable for his parents. When Isaac grew old and his eyes became dim, he called Esau. Genesis 27:2-4 describes what happened. He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Isaac wanted to bless Esau before dying, but Rebekah overheard and devised a plan. She told Jacob to bring 2 young goats so she could prepare Isaac's favorite food. Jacob would bring it to Isaac and receive the blessing instead. Jacob worried his father would discover the deception. Genesis 27:11-12 records his concern. But Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing." Rebekah covered Jacob's hands and neck with goatskins and dressed him in Esau's clothes. Jacob went to Isaac and lied, claiming to be Esau. Isaac was suspicious but touched Jacob's hairy hands. Genesis 27:22-23 says, "So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, 'The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau.' And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him." Genesis 27:27-29 records the blessing. "And he blessed him and said, 'See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you.'" Isaac blessed Jacob with abundance and authority. As soon as Jacob left, Esau returned with his food. Genesis 27:32-33 describes the discovery. His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" He answered, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed." Esau's heart broke. Genesis 27:34 captures his anguish. As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." Esau begged for a blessing, but Isaac had given everything to Jacob. Isaac's words to Esau were harsh. Genesis 27:39-40 says, "Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother, but when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Esau would live by his sword and serve Jacob. Esau's grief turned to murderous hatred. Genesis 27:41 reveals his thoughts. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Esau planned to kill Jacob after Isaac died. Rebekah warned Jacob and told him to flee to her brother Laban. Isaac blessed Jacob again and sent him away. Genesis 28:1-2 says, "Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him, 'You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother.'" Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. As the sun set, he stopped for the night. Genesis 28:11-12 describes what happened. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. God stood above the ladder. Genesis 28:13-15 records his words, "And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land." God promised to be with Jacob and bring him back. Jacob woke in awe. Genesis 28:16-17 captures his reaction. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob set up the stone as a memorial and named the place Bethel. Genesis 28:20-22 records his vow. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you." With this vow, Jacob continued his journey toward Laban's home. Jacob continued his journey and eventually reached the land of the eastern peoples. Genesis 29:1-6 describes his arrival. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well, and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." That he said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well, and see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." Just as they spoke, Rachel arrived with her father's sheep. When Jacob saw Rachel, something powerful stirred in his heart. Genesis 29:10-11 tells us what happened. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Jacob single-handedly moved the heavy stone, watered Laban's flock, kissed Rachel, and wept with joy. Rachel ran to tell her father. Laban rushed out and welcomed Jacob warmly. After a month, Laban asked what wages Jacob wanted. Jacob had already fallen deeply in love with Rachel. Genesis 29:18-20 records his offer. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. When the 7 years were complete, Laban deceived Jacob. Genesis 29:23-25 describes what happened. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. When morning came, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban had switched daughters in the darkness. Laban's excuse was custom. Genesis 29:26-27 says, Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob agreed and married Rachel after the wedding week, beginning another 7 years of service. This created a painful situation. Genesis 29:30-31 reveals the problem. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. God saw that Leah was unloved and opened her womb while Rachel remained barren. Leah gave birth to 4 sons, hoping each would make Jacob love her. She had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel, desperate for children, gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob, who bore Dan and Naphtali. Leah gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob, who bore Gad and Asher. Then Leah bore 3 more children, Issachar, Zebulun, and a daughter named Dinah. At last, God remembered Rachel. Genesis 30:22-24 records this joyful moment. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." After Joseph's birth, Jacob asked to return home, but Laban begged him to stay. They made a wage agreement involving spotted and speckled animals. Despite Laban's attempts to cheat him, Jacob prospered through selective breeding. Genesis 30:43 says, "Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys." Eventually, tensions rose. Genesis 31:1-3 describes the situation. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth." And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." God told Jacob it was time to go home. Jacob gathered his family and fled while Laban was away shearing sheep. But Rachel did something that would cause trouble. Genesis 31:19 tells us Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. Rachel secretly took Laban's household gods without telling Jacob. 3 days later, Laban discovered Jacob had fled and pursued him for 7 days. But God warned Laban in a dream not to harm Jacob. When Laban caught up, he accused Jacob of stealing his gods. Jacob didn't know Rachel had taken them. Genesis 31:32 records his rash declaration, "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it." Laban searched all the tents but couldn't find the gods. Genesis 31:34-35 explains why. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Rachel hid them in her saddle and sat on them, claiming she couldn't stand because of her period. Jacob's anger burned hot at Laban's accusations. They made a covenant of peace, set up stones as a witness, and agreed not to harm each other. In the morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and daughters goodbye and returned home. As Jacob continued home, he faced meeting Esau again. He sent messengers ahead, but they returned with alarming news. Genesis 32:6 says, "And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, 'We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him.'" Esau was coming with 400 men. Fear gripped Jacob. He divided his people and possessions into two groups, hoping at least one would survive. Then Jacob prayed desperately for God to save him from Esau's revenge. He prepared elaborate gifts, hundreds of animals sent in separate groups to appease Esau. That night, Jacob sent his family across the Jabbok River. Genesis 32:24 describes what happened when he was alone. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Undin, a mysterious man, appeared and wrestled with Jacob all night. As dawn approached, the man wanted to leave. Genesis 32:25-26 tells us, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Even with his hip dislocated, Jacob refused to let go without a blessing. Then something extraordinary happened. Genesis 32:28 records this life-changing moment. Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." The man changed Jacob's name to Israel, meaning he struggles with God. Genesis 32:30 captures Jacob's realization. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Jacob named the place Peniel because he had seen God face to face and survived. Genesis 32:31 adds, "The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip." Jacob walked away with a new name and a permanent limp. The next morning, Jacob saw Esau coming with 400 men. Genesis 33:1-3 describes Jacob's approach. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau's reaction surprised everyone. Genesis 33:4 records this emotional reunion. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Instead of attacking, Esau ran to Jacob, threw his arms around him, kissed him, and they both wept. 20 years of anger had melted away. Esau looked at Jacob's family and asked about the gifts. Genesis 33:8-9 contains their conversation. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Esau didn't need the gifts, but Jacob insisted he accept them. Esau offered to travel with Jacob, but Jacob declined, saying his children and animals needed to travel slowly. So Esau returned to Seir, while Jacob traveled to Succoth and eventually to Shechem. Genesis 33:18-20 tells us, "And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel." While living near Shechem, tragedy struck. Genesis 34:1-2 describes what happened. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. Shechem, the prince, raped Dinah. But then Shechem fell in love with Dinah and wanted to marry her. Hamor came to negotiate, and Shechem offered to pay any price, but Jacob's sons answered deceitfully. Genesis 34:13-15 describes their plan. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised." Hamor and Shechem agreed and convinced all the men of their city to be circumcised. 3 days later, when the men were still in pain, Simeon and Levi struck. Genesis 34:25-26 describes their revenge. On the third day, when they were sore, 2 of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The other sons plundered the city, taking everything. Jacob was horrified. Genesis 34:30 records his rebuke. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But Simeon and Levi defended their actions, asking if Shechem should have treated their sister like a prostitute. After this violence, God told Jacob to move. Genesis 35:1 records God's command. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Jacob prepared his household. Genesis 35:2-4 describes what he did. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. Everyone gave up their idols, which Jacob buried. As they traveled, God protected them from revenge. When they reached Bethel, Jacob built an altar. God appeared again and confirmed Jacob's new name and the covenant promises. Genesis 35:10-12 records this. "And God said to him, 'Your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name.' So he called his name Israel. And God said to him, 'I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you.'" They left Bethel, but tragedy struck. Genesis 35:16-19 describes Rachel's death. Then they journeyed from Bethel. When they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem, and Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. Jacob buried her near Bethlehem and marked her grave with a pillar. After Rachel's death, more family problems arose. Genesis 35:22 records a shocking sin. While Israel lived in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Reuben slept with Bilhah, one of Jacob's wives, a terrible betrayal. Genesis 35:23-26 lists all 12 of Jacob's sons. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Paddan Aram. These 12 sons would become the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob returned to his father Isaac in Hebron. Genesis 35:28-29 describes Isaac's death. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last, and he died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Isaac lived 180 years, and both sons buried him together. Among Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph held a special place in his father's heart. Genesis 37:3-4 explains the problem. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Jacob's open favoritism made Joseph's brothers hate him intensely. Joseph made things worse by sharing his dreams. Genesis 37:5-8 describes the first dream. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Joseph had another dream. Genesis 37:9-11 records it. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. When they saw him coming from afar, their hatred boiled over. Genesis 37:18-20 reveals their plot. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." Reuben tried to save Joseph by convincing them to throw him into a pit instead, planning to rescue him later. When Joseph arrived, they stripped him of his robe and threw him into an empty pit. While eating, the brothers saw a caravan heading to Egypt. Genesis 37:26-27 records Judah's suggestion. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Genesis 37:28 records the sale. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. They sold their brother for 20 pieces of silver. When Reuben returned and found Joseph gone, he was devastated. The brothers covered up their crime by dipping Joseph's robe in goat's blood and bringing it to Jacob. Genesis 37:33-35 captures Jacob's grief, and he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Genesis 37:36 tells Joseph's fate. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Genesis chapter 38 interrupts Joseph's story with Judah's account. Judah married a Canaanite woman who bore 3 sons, Onan and Shelah. Married Tamar, but died because of his wickedness. Onan refused to fulfill his duty to produce an heir for his brother and also died. Judah promised Tamar his third son, but didn't keep his word. Later, Tamar disguised herself as a prostitute. Judah didn't recognize her and slept with her, leaving his seal, cord, and staff as a pledge. When Judah heard Tamar was pregnant, he condemned her to death. But Genesis 38:25-26 reveals the truth. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." Judah admitted his guilt when confronted with his own items. Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave, sold to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. But Joseph didn't arrive alone. God was with him. Genesis 39:2-3 tells us what happened. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. Even in slavery, God's presence made Joseph successful. Potiphar noticed something special about Joseph and promoted him. Genesis 39:4-6 describes his rise. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Potiphar trusted Joseph completely with everything he owned, but trouble came from an unexpected source. Genesis 39:6-7 introduces the problem. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." Potiphar's wife became attracted to Joseph and propositioned him directly. Joseph refused immediately. Genesis 39:8-9 records his response. But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Joseph gave two reasons. It would betray Potiphar's trust, and it would be a sin against God. Day after day she pressured him, but Joseph consistently refused. One day, when no one else was home, she grabbed his cloak. Genesis 39:12 describes what happened. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Joseph ran away so fast he left his cloak in her hands. Rejected and humiliated, Potiphar's wife turned vengeful. She kept Joseph's cloak as evidence and accused him of assault. Genesis 39:17-18 records her lie to Potiphar. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." She blamed Potiphar for bringing Joseph into their home. Potiphar's anger burned, and he threw Joseph into prison. Genesis 39:20 says, "And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison." Joseph had done the right thing and ended up in prison because of a lie. But even in prison, God didn't abandon Joseph. Genesis 39:21-23 reveals God's continued presence. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. The prison warden saw something special in Joseph and put him in charge of all the prisoners. Sometime later, two important Egyptian officials joined Joseph in prison. Genesis 41:3 explains, "Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker had somehow offended the king. One night both men had dreams. Genesis 46:8 describes what Joseph noticed. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers, who were with him in custody in his master's house, 'Why are your faces downcast today?' They said to him, 'We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them.' And Joseph said to them, 'Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me.' Joseph pointed them to God and asked them to share their dreams. The cupbearer described his dream about a vine with 3 branches that produced grapes, which he pressed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph interpreted it. Genesis 40:12-13 contains the good news. Then Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer.' In 3 days the cupbearer would be restored. Joseph made a request. Genesis 40:14 records his plea, 'Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house.' Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and mention him to Pharaoh. The baker shared his dream next. Joseph had bad news. Genesis 40:18-19 contains the grim interpretation. And Joseph answered and said, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you.' In 3 days, the baker would be executed. 3 days later, everything happened exactly as Joseph predicted. Genesis 40:20-22 says, 'On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them.' But then came crushing disappointment. Genesis 40:23 tells us, 'Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. The cupbearer forgot all about Joseph. 2 full years passed with Joseph still in prison. Then Pharaoh had troubling dreams.' Genesis 41:1-4 describes the first. 'After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. 7 thin cows ate 7 fat cows.' Pharaoh had a second dream about 7 healthy grain stalks being swallowed by 7 thin stalks. These dreams troubled him deeply. Genesis 41:8 says, 'So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh.' No one could interpret his dreams. Finally, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Genesis 41:9-13 records what he told Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner who had correctly interpreted dreams 2 years earlier. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. Genesis 41:14 describes the rush. 'Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Joseph shaved, changed clothes, and was brought before Pharaoh. When Pharaoh explained he heard Joseph could interpret dreams, Joseph immediately gave God the credit. Genesis 41-16 records his response. Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Joseph said he couldn't interpret dreams, but God could. After hearing both dreams, Joseph explained their meaning. Genesis 41:25-27 contains the interpretation. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. 7 years of abundance would be followed by 7 years of famine." Joseph didn't just interpret, he offered a solution. Genesis 41:33-36 contains his advice. "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it." Egypt needed to store grain during the good years to survive the famine. Pharaoh recognized God's spirit in Joseph. Genesis 41:39-40 describes his response. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second in command over all Egypt. Genesis 41:42-43 describes Joseph's elevation. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot. And they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Joseph went from prison to palace in one day. Joseph was 30 years old. During the 7 good years, he collected grain in massive quantities. Genesis 41:49 says, "And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Then the famine began, exactly as predicted, affecting all surrounding lands. The famine reached Canaan, where Jacob's family lived. Genesis 42:1-2 describes Jacob's decision. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." Jacob sent his sons to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob kept Benjamin at home. Genesis 42:4 explains why. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Benjamin was Joseph's only full brother, and Jacob couldn't bear to lose him too. 10 brothers traveled to Egypt. Genesis 42:6 tells us what happened. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. They bowed before Joseph, not recognizing their own brother. Joseph's childhood dreams were coming true. Genesis 42:7-8 describes this tense moment. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Joseph immediately recognized them, but they had no idea who he was. Joseph accused them of being spies. They defended themselves, explaining they were 12 brothers. One was with their father, and one was dead. Joseph insisted on a test. Genesis 42:15-16 describes his plan. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined. They would have to bring their youngest brother to prove their story. After 3 days in custody, Joseph changed his terms slightly. One brother would stay as a hostage while the others returned home with grain. They had to come back with Benjamin. The brothers began talking among themselves in Hebrew, not realizing Joseph understood. Genesis 42:21 reveals their guilt. Then they said to one another, "In truth we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." They believed this trouble was punishment for what they did to Joseph. Joseph understood every word and had to turn away and weep. He had Simeon bound as the hostage and sent the others away. But Joseph secretly returned their money by placing it in their grain sacks. When they discovered this on the journey home, they were terrified. Back home, they told Jacob everything. When Jacob heard they needed Benjamin, he refused. Genesis 42:36-38 records his response. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." Jacob refused to let Benjamin go. But the famine continued, and their grain ran out. Jacob told his sons to return to Egypt, but Judah reminded him they couldn't go without Benjamin. Finally, Judah made a personal guarantee. Genesis 43:8-9 contains his pledge. Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him." Judah promised to take personal responsibility for Benjamin. Jacob reluctantly agreed. When they arrived in Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph saw them and ordered a feast prepared. The brothers were afraid, thinking they were being arrested because of the returned money. But Joseph's steward reassured them and brought Simeon out to them. When Joseph came home, they presented gifts and bowed. Joseph asked about their father, then saw Benjamin. Genesis 43:29-30 describes his emotional reaction. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Seeing Benjamin overwhelmed Joseph with emotion. After composing himself, they ate together. Benjamin received 5 times as much food as anyone else. The next morning, Joseph told his steward to fill their sacks with grain, return their money, and hide his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Shortly after they left, Joseph sent his steward after them with an accusation. The brothers were so confident of their innocence, they made a rash vow. Genesis 44:9 contains their declaration, "Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants." When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, they were devastated. They tore their clothes and returned to the city. Joseph said only Benjamin would become his slave. The others could go home. This was more than Judah could bear. He delivered a moving speech explaining how their father had already lost one son and couldn't bear to lose Benjamin. Then Judah made an incredible offer. Genesis 44:33-34 says, "Now therefore please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." Judah offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. Judah's speech broke Joseph completely. Genesis 45:1 describes what happened. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Joseph ordered all Egyptians out. Genesis 45:2-3 records the revelation, "And he wept aloud, so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?' But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Joseph wept loudly and revealed his identity. His brothers were too shocked to respond. Joseph called them closer. Genesis 45:4-5 contains his explanation. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Joseph saw God's hand in everything. God sent him ahead to save lives. Genesis 45:7-8 continues his explanation. "And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. What they meant for evil, God used for good." Joseph told them to hurry home and bring their father. Genesis 45:9-11 records his instructions. "Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come." Joseph invited his entire family to Egypt. Joseph embraced Benjamin and kissed all his brothers. Pharaoh heard the news and invited Jacob's family to Egypt, promising them the best land. Joseph sent them home, loaded with gifts, provisions, and wagons. When they told Jacob that Joseph was alive, he didn't believe them at first. Genesis 45:26-28 describes his reaction. "And they told him, 'Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt.' And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, 'It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.' When Jacob saw the wagons, his spirit revived. Jacob and his entire family, 70 people in all, traveled to Egypt. On the way, God spoke to Jacob. Genesis 46:3-4 records God's words. Then he said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.'" God reassured Jacob and promised Joseph would be with him when he died. When they arrived, Joseph went to meet his father. Genesis 46:29 describes their reunion. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. After 22 years, father and son were finally reunited. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. When he was 147 years old and knew death was near, he called Joseph and made him swear to bury him in Canaan, not Egypt. Before dying, Jacob blessed Joseph's 2 sons, adopting Ephraim and Manasseh as his own. Then Jacob called all his sons together and prophesied over each one, describing their future and the future of their tribes. After blessing his sons, Jacob gave final instructions about his burial. Genesis 49:29-30 records his words. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. Jacob wanted to be buried with Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. Then Jacob died. Genesis 49:33 says, When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Joseph wept over his father, had him embalmed, and led a great funeral procession back to Canaan to bury him. After Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers feared revenge. They sent a message claiming Jacob had asked Joseph to forgive them. Joseph's response showed his heart. Genesis 50:19-21 records his words. But Joseph said to them, Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph reassured them he wouldn't harm them. Joseph lived to 110 years old. Before dying, he made a prophecy. Genesis 50:24-25 contains his final words. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. Joseph prophesied that God would eventually bring Israel out of Egypt back to the Promised Land. Genesis 50:26 concludes the book. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Joseph died in Egypt, but his faith looked forward to God's promises. If this journey through Genesis has impacted you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you can continue exploring God's Word with us. Share this video with your friends, your family, your small group, anyone who needs to hear these ancient stories that still speak truth today. Drop a comment below and tell us which story from Genesis spoke to you the most. Was it Abraham's faith, Joseph's forgiveness, Jacob's wrestling with God? The story doesn't end here. Genesis is just the beginning. God's promises continue unfolding throughout Scripture, leading ultimately to Jesus, the offspring of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video as we continue our journey through the Bible.